It was the middle of November when 22-year-old Rachel found herself home alone for the weekend. Her parents had left for a short getaway, trusting that their responsible daughter could manage the house on her own. It wasn't the first time Rachel had been left alone. This time felt different. The house was nestled at the edge of town, surrounded by woods that seemed to swallow sound and light as soon as the sun went down. Still, Rachel welcomed the solitude. She had exams to study for, and the quiet would help her focus. The first night started off normal enough. She ordered takeout, curled up on the couch, and binge-watched her favorite series. The only sounds were the occasional rustling of the trees outside and the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. As the clock crept towards midnight, Rachel decided to head upstairs to her bedroom. She double-checked the locks on the doors and turned off all the lights, save for the small lamp by her bedside. She slipped into bed, pulling the blankets up to her chin, and within minutes she was drifting off to sleep. But not long after, something woke her. It was subtle at first, a soft creaking sound, as if the house were settling. She opened her eyes, staring at the ceiling, her heartbeat quickening. She told herself it was nothing. Old houses made noises, especially at night. She rolled over, trying to get comfortable, but the noise came again. This time it was clearer. The distinct sound of a floorboard creaking, like someone was slowly walking down the hallway. She held her breath, her ears straining against the silence. The house fell quiet again, and for a moment she thought she might have imagined it. But then it happened again. Her mind raced with explanations. Maybe it was a raccoon in the attic, or perhaps the wind had knocked something over outside. She reached for her phone, its screen lighting up the dark room. The time read 2:13 a.m. She hesitated, then dialed her mum's number. The phone rang, but there was no answer. She tried her dad next. Nothing. She didn't want to seem paranoid, so she sent a quick text. "Think I heard something, probably nothing. Call me when you wake up." She set the phone down and listened. The creaking had stopped. The house was silent again. She lay back down, her body rigid, eyes fixed on the door. Minutes passed, stretching into what felt like hours. She must have dozed off, because the next time she opened her eyes it was still dark, but something was wrong. The lamp beside her bed was off. She was sure she had left it on. She reached for the switch, but the light didn't respond. Panic started to set in. She fumbled for her phone, but it was gone. She always kept it on the nightstand, but her hand found nothing but the cool wood of the tabletop. Her breathing grew shallow. She sat up slowly, her eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the window. Shadows stretched across the room, but one of them didn't look right. It was darker, thicker, standing near the corner of the room. She squinted, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The shadow moved. Her scream died in her throat as the figure stepped forward, a tall silhouette blending with the darkness. She could see the glint of eyes, the outline of a face. Someone was in her room. She threw off the blankets and bolted for the door. Her feet hit the hardwood floor, but she slipped, crashing to the ground. The shadow lunged, and she felt a cold hand brush against her ankle. She kicked out, scrambling to her feet and stumbling into the hallway. Her mind was blank, pure adrenaline taking over. She ran down the stairs, the house a blur around her. She reached the front door, her hands fumbling with the lock. It wouldn't budge. She twisted and pulled, but it felt as if the door was fused to the frame. Behind her, soft footsteps descended the stairs, each one slow and deliberate. She turned, her back pressed against the door, and saw him. The intruder stood halfway down the staircase, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He wore dark clothes, his head cocked to the side as if studying her. "What do you want?" she managed to choke out, her voice trembling. He didn't answer. Instead, he took another step forward, his foot landing on the step with a soft creak, then another and another. She darted into the kitchen, pulling drawers open, searching for anything she could use as a weapon. Her hands closed around a knife, the metal cool against her skin. She turned to face him, the blade held out in front of her. "Stay back!" The man stopped, his head tilting further, an unnatural angle that made her stomach twist. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes were wide, unblinking. He took another step, his feet gliding soundlessly over the floor. She lashed out with the knife, but he moved faster than she expected. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. His grip was ice cold, his skin rough and dry. She struggled, the knife clattering to the floor. He leaned in close, his breath cold against her cheek. She could see his eyes now, glassy and unfocused, like a doll's. His lips moved, and finally she heard his voice, a whisper, thin and brittle. "You shouldn't be here." Her vision blurred, the room spinning. She felt her legs give out, her body crumpling to the floor. the last thing she saw was his face, that twisted, unnatural grin. When Rachel's parents returned 2 days later, they found the house empty. Her phone lay on the nightstand, the last message still unsent. The front door was locked, the windows secured. There was no sign of a struggle, no indication that anyone had ever been there, except for the footprints. They led from Rachel's bedroom, down the stairs, through the kitchen, and stopped at the basement door. But the basement had been sealed for years, boarded up after the previous owner died, alone in the dark. The police never found Rachel, but sometimes when the house is quiet and the night is at its darkest, neighbors say they can still see a light flickering in the window. And if you stand close enough, if you listen carefully, you might hear a voice. You shouldn't be here. Megan had never been afraid of being home alone. At 19, she had grown used to her parents leaving her behind for their occasional weekend getaways. It had become routine, the gentle hug from her mom, the playful fist bump from her dad, and the comforting rumble of their car pulling out of the driveway. She'd usually spend her time binge-watching shows, scrolling through social media, and indulging in junk food without judgment. It was supposed to be just another quiet weekend. The house was a modest two-story in a quiet suburb, nestled at the end of a cul-de-sac where nothing ever happened. It was the kind of neighborhood where neighbors nodded hello but kept to themselves. Safe, boring, exactly how Megan liked it. She planned to watch movies all night and maybe invite her best friend Sarah over the next day. Friday night came and went without incident. The most excitement she had was a jump scare from the horror movie she streamed. She laughed at herself, muting the eerie music while she grabbed another handful of popcorn. By midnight, the house was dark, the only light coming from her bedroom window as she drifted off to sleep. It was the phone that woke her. She squinted at the clock, 3:07 a.m. Her phone vibrated softly on the nightstand, the screen glowing with an unknown number. Megan's first instinct was to ignore it, probably a spam call. But something compelled her to answer. She swiped the screen and brought the phone to her ear. Hello? Silence. She pulled the phone away, checking if the call had dropped, but the timer on the screen kept ticking. She tried again. Hello, is anyone there? The silence was heavy, as if someone were on the other end, listening, breathing. Then, just as she was about to hang up, a soft click, and the line went dead. Megan stared at the phone, a chill creeping down her spine. She shook it off, blaming it on a glitch or a pocket dial. She set the phone back down, turned over, and closed her eyes. But sleep didn't come. Minutes stretched into an hour, and her mind refused to settle. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside felt amplified. She told herself it was just nerves, the remnants of the horror movie playing tricks on her mind. She eventually slipped back into an uneasy sleep. Then the phone rang again. Her eyes snapped open, and her heart pounded against her ribs. The clock read 3:33 a.m. The same unknown number glowed on the screen. She hesitated this time, her thumb hovering over the answer button. She pressed it, the phone trembling slightly in her grip. Who is this? Her voice cracked. Silence. A long, suffocating silence, broken only by the faintest whisper. She couldn't make out the words, but there was a rhythm to it, a soft, unsettling chant. "Stop it," she hissed. "This isn't funny." The whispering stopped, and for a moment the line was dead. Then a voice, deep, guttural, and wrong, spoke 2 words. "Look outside." Megan's breath hitched. She sat up slowly, the room spinning around her. The phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the hardwood floor. She could hear the dial tone now, a constant, droning hum. Her window faced the backyard. Beyond the glass was nothing but darkness, the faint outline of trees swaying in the wind. She slid out of bed, her bare feet touching the cold floor, and took slow, deliberate steps toward the window. She pulled the curtain aside, her fingers trembling. At first she saw nothing but the dark expanse of the yard, but as her eyes adjusted, a shape materialized, a figure standing just beyond the reach of the porch light, tall, still, watching. Megan stumbled back, her shoulder hitting the wall. She bit back a scream, her hands clamping over her mouth. The figure didn't move, didn't react. It was like a statue, its features lost in the shadows. Her phone buzzed again. She jumped, staring at it as if it might bite her. The screen was cracked from the fall, but the unknown number flashed once more. She couldn't bring herself to answer it. Instead, she slid down the wall, her knees to her chest, her breath coming in shallow gasps. The phone stopped ringing, Silence enveloped the room, thick and oppressive. Megan's mind raced. Should she call the police? But what would she say? That someone was standing in her yard, just standing? She forced herself to move. She crawled over to the phone, her fingers brushing against the cracked screen. She dialed Sarah's number, her best friend, the one person who would believe her. The line rang once, twice, then, "Megan?" Sarah's voice, groggy with sleep. "Sarah," Megan whispered, her voice thin and broken. "There's someone outside. I don't know what to do. Where are your parents? They're gone. I'm alone. The call dropped. "No," Megan breathed. She looked at the screen. No signal. She stood up, her legs weak beneath her, and moved to the door. She needed to get out, needed to find help. She crept down the hallway, the floorboards groaning beneath her weight. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward her, every corner a potential hiding place. She reached the front door, her fingers brushing the cold metal of the lock. A noise behind her. She spun around, her eyes wide. The back door was open. Her mind reeled. She hadn't opened it. She was sure of it. She took a step back, her heel hitting the door. Her hand tightened around the handle. The phone rang again. This time it wasn't coming from her hand. The sound echoed through the house, distant but unmistakable. She turned, and there, in the darkness of the living room, a soft glow, her phone lying on the couch. But it couldn't be. She was holding it. She looked down at her hand, and it was empty. The ringing continued, each chime burrowing into her skull. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The shadows shifted, and the figure stepped forward, emerging from the hallway. Its face was hers. The phone went silent. When Megan's parents returned, they found the house locked, the windows secured, and no sign of their daughter. The police found nothing, no forced entry, no struggle. Just her phone resting on the couch with one missed call from an unknown number. And sometimes late at night, Sarah's phone still rings. When she answers, all she hears is Megan's voice, a soft, distant whisper. "Look outside." Mason had always been the independent type. At 17, he often stayed home alone while his parents went on their weekend trips to visit family in the next state over. He enjoyed the freedom, no rules, no curfews, and a chance to binge horror movies with the volume turned up. His parents would leave early Friday morning and return Sunday evening, giving him 2 full days of solitude. This particular weekend was no different. Mason's parents had left at dawn, their SUV packed for the trip. He waved them off, already planning his movie marathon. The house was a modest split level, tucked into a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever happened. As the sun set, the shadows stretched long across the backyard, and Mason set up his spot on the couch, popcorn in hand, blankets piled high. The movie he chose was slow at first, a typical haunted house story. The creaks and groans of the old mansion on screen mixed with the settling sounds of his own home. The 2-story house often made noise, the wooden beams shifting with the temperature, the old pipes hissing now and then. Mason had grown up with these sounds. They were as familiar as his own breathing. Halfway through the movie, Mason heard it, a soft thud like something heavy falling onto carpet. He paused the film, the silence filling the house. His mind immediately rationalized it. A book falling off his cluttered desk, maybe his cat, Mittens, knocking something over. But then he remembered Mittens had been gone for months, a victim of the busy road nearby. His chest tightened, but he stood up anyway, walking toward the hallway. "Hello!" he called out, his voice sounding small. Silence. He moved room to room, checking each space. The kitchen was empty, the bathroom door stood open, the guest room untouched. His parents' bedroom was last. He nudged the door open with his foot, the hinges whining. The room lay undisturbed, the bed neatly made, the curtains drawn. He let out a breath, chuckling at his own nerves. The movie had just gotten to the first big scare when the noise came again. This time it was louder, more deliberate. Mason sat up, his hand clutching the remote. He muted the TV, the silence pressing against his ears. The sound came again. A dragging noise, as if something heavy was being pulled across the attic floor. The attic. His parents had always told him to stay out of the attic. It was filled with old furniture, boxes of holiday decorations, and keepsakes from before he was born. It was also dusty, cramped, and altogether unpleasant. He had only been up there once, years ago, when his mum had asked him to fetch a box of Christmas lights. He remembered the stifling heat, the way the air tasted of dust and rot. The noise came again, a steady scrape, then a thud. His skin prickled. He stood, his legs feeling strangely detached from his body. Each step toward the attic door felt heavier than the last. The door to the attic was a pull-down hatch in the hallway ceiling. He reached up, his fingers brushing the metal ring, and pulled. The ladder unfolded with a groan, the wooden steps stretching out in front of him. The attic swallowed the weak glow from the hallway light, its shadows thick and unmoving. He climbed, the ladder creaking beneath his weight. His head broke through the opening, and the stale air hit him thick and musty. His flashlight cast a narrow beam, illuminating the cluttered space. Boxes lined the walls, their lids bulging, duct tape yellowed with age. An old dresser leaned against the far wall, a cracked mirror resting on top. "Is anyone there?" he whispered, his breath clouding in the cold air. Silence. He pulled himself fully into the attic, his feet settling on the wooden boards. They felt damp, the wood soft and spongy beneath his sneakers. He moved forward, the flashlight jittering in his hand. The noise came again to his left. He swung the light, its beams slicing through the dark. The mirror on the dresser caught the light, throwing his reflection back at him. His own eyes stared wide and glassy, his face pale. A shadow moved behind him. He spun around, the flashlight beam flaring against the walls. Nothing, just boxes, shadows, and the old wooden beams of the roof. His breathing was too loud, each exhale a cloud in the freezing air, and then, from behind him, a soft, wet sound. He turned slowly, the flashlight beam landing on the dresser again. The mirror was fogged, moisture beading on the glass. Words slowly formed, written by an unseen hand. "Help me." Mason stumbled backward, his foot catching on a loose board. He hit the floor hard, the impact rattling his teeth. The flashlight rolled away, its beam spinning wildly, casting twisted shadows across the walls. The attic door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed him. His screams bounced off the walls, lost in the thick air. The shadows moved, pulling away from the corners, creeping toward him. He felt the floor give beneath him, the boards cracking, splintering. Hands reached out, small, cold and damp. They gripped his ankles, pulling him down, the wood splintering around him. The last thing he saw was the mirror, his own reflection staring back, eyes hollow, mouth open in a silent scream. When Mason's parents returned home Sunday evening, they found the house exactly as they had left it. The front door was locked, the windows closed. They called for Mason, but the house remained silent. His phone lay on the couch. The TV paused at the end credits of his movie. They searched every room, every closet, even the basement, but the attic door wouldn't budge. They called the police, who forced the door open, revealing the empty, dust-covered space. Except for one thing, on the dresser sat the old mirror, its glass cracked, and etched into the dust-covered surface were the words, "I'm still here." The house was sold within a month, the new family never knowing about the boy who had vanished. But sometimes, on quiet nights, the attic door opens on its own, and if you listen closely, you might hear him. Mason whispering from the shadows, waiting for someone to find him. And there you have it, 3 disturbing true Home Alone stories that will make you think twice about spending a night by yourself. If these tales sent shivers down your spine, make sure to like this video and share it with your friends who love a good scare. Let us know in the comments which story haunted you the most. Was it the unseen visitor, the unsettling call, or the attic that swallowed a soul? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a spine-tingling story from our channel. There's always another nightmare waiting to be told, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching. And remember, when you're home alone, you might not be as alone as you think. Stay curious, stay scared, and we'll see you in the next video.